What if tomorrow morning, every dollar, euro, yen, and yuan stopped existing? No exchange rates, no currency markets, no Federal Reserve, no European Central Bank, just one global currency, one unit of value, one system for the entire planet. Would it end currency wars? Would it stabilize inflation? Would it make trade seamless and economies more efficient? Or would it create the most powerful financial authority in human history? Because money is not just a tool of exchange, it is a tool of control. And whoever issues the money shapes the world that uses it. This is not a fantasy question, it is a structural one. The idea of a single global currency has appeared repeatedly across history, in empires, in monetary unions, in global institutions. Each time it promised stability. Each time it revealed something deeper about power. Today, as global trade tightens, digital currencies expand, and geopolitical tensions rise, the question is no longer theoretical. It is quietly becoming practical. To understand what would happen if the world had only one currency, we first need to understand why the world has many. For most of history, money was local. Kingdoms minted their own coins. Empires stamped their rulers' faces onto metal discs, not just to facilitate trade, but to project authority. A currency was a declaration of sovereignty. It said, "This territory answers to this power." When the Roman Empire expanded, it carried the denarius across continents. Trade flourished under a shared monetary standard. Prices became predictable. Taxes became easier to collect. Soldiers were paid consistently. For a time, one currency unified a vast region. But that unity depended on trust and discipline. When Rome began diluting its silver coins to finance wars and public spending, inflation spread across the empire. A single currency meant a single monetary mistake could ripple everywhere. When confidence weakened, so did the empire. The lesson was subtle but profound. A shared currency creates efficiency. It also creates shared vulnerability. Centuries later, Europe tried again. After generations of war, economic fragmentation, and volatile exchange rates, leaders envisioned a continent bound not only by treaties, but by money. The euro was born from this ambition. One currency for multiple nations, a symbol of unity. At first, it worked. Trade between member countries became frictionless. Exchange rate uncertainty disappeared. Capital flowed more freely. For businesses, it was a dream of stability. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had changed. Individual nations no longer controlled their own monetary policy. They could not devalue their currency during recessions. They could not independently adjust interest rates. Decisions were centralized. When the global financial crisis struck in 2008, this structural weakness became visible. Countries like Greece and Spain faced deep recessions. In the past, they might have devalued their currencies to restore competitiveness. But with a shared currency, that lever was gone. The result was not currency adjustment, but austerity. Unemployment soared. Social tensions rose. A single currency had unified the continent. It had also synchronized its pain. Now imagine scaling that model to the entire planet. In theory, one global currency would eliminate exchange rate volatility. No more currency speculation. No more sudden devaluations wiping out savings. International trade would become simpler and more transparent. Multinational corporations would operate without currency risk. Remittances would move without conversion costs. For developing nations, a stable global currency could reduce inflation instability. For exporters, it could simplify pricing. For investors, it could create a single, deep, liquid market. It sounds efficient, almost elegant. But efficiency in economics often conceals trade-offs. Today, when one country enters recession, its central bank can lower interest rates. It can stimulate demand. It can expand its money supply. Another country, experiencing inflation, can tighten policy. Multiple currencies allow for local adaptation. With one currency, those tools disappear at the national level. A global central authority would set a single interest rate for billions of people living under radically different economic conditions. What interest rate fits both Germany and Ghana? What monetary policy satisfies both Japan's aging population and India's expanding workforce? A global currency would require global coordination, and coordination requires power. Who would issue this currency? Who would decide how much of it exists? Who would receive new liquidity first during crises? History shows that money creation is rarely neutral. When central banks expand balance sheets, financial assets tend to rise first. Those closest to capital markets benefit early. Those further away feel the effects later, often as inflation. Scale that dynamic globally, and the stakes multiply. Consider the United States dollar today. It functions as the world's primary reserve currency. Countries hold dollars for trade and stability. Commodities are priced in dollars. During crises, global investors rush toward it. This position grants the United States extraordinary influence. It can borrow in its own currency at scale. It can impose financial sanctions that ripple across continents. It can export inflation through global demand for its debt. Now imagine that privilege transferred to a truly global authority. A single currency would mean a single point of systemic failure. If confidence faltered, there would be no alternative currency to flee into, no diversification across sovereign systems. A banking crisis in one region could instantly transmit everywhere. Some argue that digital technology makes a global currency inevitable. Central bank digital currencies are already being tested. Cross-border payment systems are modernizing. International institutions like the International Monetary Fund have experimented with synthetic reserve assets. The infrastructure is emerging. But technology does not eliminate politics, it intensifies it. Monetary policy is deeply tied to national identity and democratic accountability. Citizens tolerate inflation or austerity differently depending on local context. Would voters in one region accept policies designed primarily to stabilize another? The euro revealed how fragile such compromises can be, and that was among countries with relatively aligned institutions. A global currency would require a level of political integration humanity has never achieved. There is also the question of inequality. Wealth disparities across nations are vast. A single currency would not erase those gaps. In fact, it might amplify them. Capital flows towards stability and high returns. If monetary policy is centralized, regions with stronger institutions and financial infrastructure may attract disproportionate investment. Without exchange rates to buffer imbalances, struggling economies could face prolonged stagnation. Yet the idea persists because it speaks to a powerful instinct: unity. In a world fractured by trade disputes, currency manipulation accusations, and financial sanctions, one currency appears to offer neutrality. But money has never been neutral. It reflects power structures. It distributes opportunity. It determines who adjusts and who absorbs shock. During financial crises, countries with their own currencies can inflate away debt or restructure internally. In a single currency world, those adjustments would be collective and potentially contentious. There is another dimension rarely discussed. Multiple currencies create competition. If one country mismanages its money, investors can move elsewhere. That pressure enforces a degree of discipline. A global monopoly on currency would remove that check. Monopolies, even benevolent ones, tend toward concentration, and concentration tends toward fragility. So would one global currency make the world richer? In some ways, yes. Transaction costs would fall, trade could accelerate, financial integration could deepen. But integration without flexibility can become rigidity. The modern global economy is already tightly connected. Supply chains span continents. Financial markets react within milliseconds. We have witnessed how shocks in one region cascade worldwide. A single currency would tighten those links further. The real question is not whether it is technically possible. It is whether humanity is prepared for the level of coordination, trust, and shared governance it demands. Because a currency is ultimately a promise that value today will hold value tomorrow. A promise backed by institutions, laws, and political will. If that promise rests on one authority for 8 billion people, its strength must be extraordinary, and its failure would be unprecedented. History suggests that monetary systems evolve slowly, often in response to crisis. The gold standard gave way to Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods gave way to floating exchange rates. Each transition followed economic strain. Perhaps one day, a global crisis will push nations toward a unified currency. If that happens, the debate will not simply be about efficiency. It will be about sovereignty, accountability, and control. Until then, multiple currencies remain both a source of friction and a buffer of resilience. They allow diversity of policy. They permit local experimentation. They distribute risk across systems. A world with one currency would be more unified. It would also be more centralized. And centralization throughout history has always come with a cost. So the next time you exchange money across borders or watch currencies rise and fall, consider what they represent. Not just prices, not just trade, but independent levers of power. Because if the world ever speaks in one monetary voice, the question will not be how convenient it feels. It will be, who holds the microphone? If you want to understand money beyond headlines and textbooks, consider subscribing to Money Lens Media. Because history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.